Welcome to Charts Today. My name is David Linton, and today's edition for Wednesday, the 15th of November, comes to you from London. And wow, what a day it was in markets yesterday. We had that US inflation number yesterday and the UK inflation number out today. Both numbers surprising the market, but it was that US number that really caught the market by surprise. Much better number on inflation. And so let's look at what effect that has had on the market. So the first thing is that the dollar index, we did have this thrust target given from July all the way through to August. That was an uninterrupted buying thrust. By the way, if you want to know how these targets work, I'll put a longer video explaining them in the comments on this video. And lots of people have asked the questions, so please keep them coming. If you've got any comments or questions, I'm always happy to answer them. So just message me, and remember to like and share. So I'm grateful for that as well. So we look at the dollar index. That target there is orange because it wasn't activated. We have to move another 0.5% higher, having pulled back, to then activate the target. So this highlights the importance of waiting for target activation, and we saw that really big move for the day. That's the daily candle. This is the medium-term chart as highlighted there for the dollar index. And meanwhile, we had a downside target activated with the first move on that announcement. So this was the downside thrust target that was activated. We found support at 104 on the dollar index. Will we go to 101? If we go below 104, this is the track that we'll be watching. So it's always this if we go below that support level. So, but we are below the cloud here, so that's quite key. And we have actually been below the cloud for the most part for the past week or so. So really quite interesting there, just seeing that. And of course, that means that the euro jumped and again, we had the target given on the euro last week to 109. We actually touched 108.90 yesterday, so we haven't quite got to that target, and it took longer than the target projection. But the fact is that we were seeing the upside there. We're not above the cloud yet on the daily, so it's too early to call a change there. And if we look at the Japanese yen, the really key thing here is we nudged 152 yesterday. We have pulled back to 150 this morning, so we're seeing that that dollar yen has really been affected by that, so that might be as high as we go now. Sterling fell away yesterday, and we saw that big jump in sterling on the dollar move. Today's announcement on inflation really hasn't had a big impact for sterling. It was really that US announcement that had the impact there, so that's really been quite key as well. Now, as for markets, we'll look at stock indices and then some commodities, and last of all we'll look at some energy. But interestingly, we saw this big gap yesterday. That's the daily candle. Be very interesting to see what happens today. We've got the future up another 0.5% today, but if we opened and left a gap there, that could be an island reversal. We have to watch and wait to see whether that happens. We've got a new upside target activated yesterday, another 2% higher for the Nasdaq, and that would take us to a new high. So we're really quite key there. And that target is 181. The longer term target was 16,248. Can we make a new high? Market looking very extended at the moment, but the interesting thing now is, can we make a new high? So that's going to be the key thing. Watch those shorter term charts if you're trading for any signs of a pullback in the market. If we look at the S&P future, this target was activated yesterday as well. The downside target was nearly met. It's safe to say now that this target is done. You can look at that and just say, well, that was the move towards the target. We didn't quite get there. That's bullish confirmation. We are moving above the cloud, but for the moment, it would take quite a lot to get to a new all-time high there. So that's going to be quite key as well. And as I mentioned, the Nasdaq future is up today, so watch that. Here's the FTSE future. We have these were the downside targets. We activated an upside target on the 13th. That was on Monday, and that's where we've gone to. So that was the move. That's the target met, so really quite key there. And if we look at the DAX, no surprises here that we're seeing similar ideas with the targets. So downside targets, we only got halfway to those targets, and they're now looking more and more off the cards. They'll be negated, of course, if we move above the high points where they were given. Here was the short-term target given last week. That was given on Wednesday, and met yesterday. So interesting that we're just seeing those short-term moves being met. So really quite key there. The Aussie market, global markets, we saw these moves pretty much across the board. Aussie jumping on that US, and I noticed quite a lot of my Aussie stocks were much higher overnight. So that's always good news. We'll look at the energy mix in a minute. Just looking at some of the commodities, I would just highlight sugar. I did post on LinkedIn yesterday. If you're not following me on LinkedIn, I do post quite a lot of charts there. So do follow me on LinkedIn. I've got over 30,000 followers there, so it's well worth watching any posts there. Upside targets, we're waiting for this tassel. We've got they're orange because they haven't been activated. If we activate this one to the upside, it will turn green. If we activate this one to the downside, it will turn red. These are all set up in your system as standard, so you should just be seeing those. But sugar has yesterday activated that downside target. So short term, we are seeing that move, which is tempering these longer term. This is the medium term chart for sugar. This is the short term chart for sugar. So really quite interesting there. Gold, we saw really a big reversal in fortunes here yesterday as well. The downside target with that Fed announcement, or that interest rate announcement in the US, that's now put gold back onto an upward path. We're bullish above the cloud there, waiting for this upside target to 2,395 to be activated. That will be activated with a move above 208. So worth watching that. Can we activate this upside target and then forget about this downside one? That's really what we've got to watch for. And of course, on the long-term chart on gold, this is the weekly chart. We see here we've already got an upside target of 2,500 activated. A new upside target into 3,600 would be activated with a new all-time high. This long consolidation phase, will we finally break? So that's the big question there. Bond yields, of course, they moved on the inflation number. No big surprises there. We saw the target actually exceeded to the upside here. That's we've seen that pullback, and yesterday we gave a target just before the inflation number, so bond markets were already pricing in a big move, and the target was given to 4.5%, and we actually went well below that. So the target was already there in place. If you were trading bonds, you had a heads up there, and of course on the long-term chart, not a lot has changed. Yesterday is just not changing the long-term picture. Now let's look at the energy mix. We start by looking at Brent Crude. Interesting here, we are seeing downside targets on the medium term. That one was met at 83, 82.60. We've got bigger downside targets here. That 172 was nearly met. Targets into the 60s, and we are still below the cloud, just finding some resistance there on the lagging line. But if we look at the 60-minute chart, we see here how we're seeing this on quite a lot of energy products, and we'll look at that, how we've turned through the cloud and we've activated these upside targets. I use 2 as my standard slope. That means 0.1% every 2 hours. So that's just a way to think of it. And we'll talk about that in a minute. Remember, I do have that video that you can watch which explains that. That's one thing to think about just in terms of the slope. But crude oil just turning a little bit higher there. So that's quite key. US NatGas. We did fall back on US NatGas, and we have actually we've got these long-term upside targets, but we've activated some downside. So we've got a mixed picture, and that's often the case with Natty. And we're seeing here that at the moment, the downside targets is we're just moving there. So it's a very mixed picture. And on our charts, in our morning call, we've been saying as much. Looking at emissions, that's really quite clearly turned a corner there. If we look on the 60-minute chart, that's quite clear. And so certainly worth looking at that. And if we look at gas, we see here, if we look at TTF, we've actually got long-term or medium-term upside targets, waiting for this one to activate, looking a bit better. We went out as bullish to clients this morning on gas. And last of all, German power, really quite key here. If we go to the 60-minute chart, we did a poll yesterday, which will put the results out. If I press the T key, you can do this on each chart, and this is where it is worth looking at changing your target. So if I went to say 1 and 1, that will give us targets that are met. And the question in the poll yesterday was, would we go below 100 by the end of the expiry? We have got a target to 96, so that's quite key. Remember to look at the comments. I put the longer video explaining the targets. That's it for today. Until tomorrow, happy charting. Bye for now.